What is the craziest war tactic used in history? The Persian Empire was noted for putting their largest men on their smallest ponies and organizing them into parade units. Enemy cities saw them from far off and thought that they were giants riding normal-sized horses. This often led to either surrender or a significant drop in morale, allowing the Persians to gain the upper hand. Probably not the craziest, but pretty creative. Even the USS Texas was assigned to the D-Day invasion. They found that the cannons didn't have the range to support the troops, so the captain ordered one of the torpedo blisters to be filled with water. This caused the ship to lean to one side, which increased the firing arc of its older guns. During World War II, Japan floated hot air balloons containing incendiary devices across the Pacific Ocean, hoping to start forest fires. No fires were started, but one of the balloons did explode and killed a few civilians. The media was not allowed to report on it, which eventually led to Japan abandoning the tactic because they were hoping to hear about the results in the US news. Not exactly a crazy tactic, but Alexander the Great wanted to attack the island city of Tyre in modern-day Lebanon. It was half a mile off the coast, and the key word was. They built a causeway of rock to get close enough for archers, and eventually turned it into a peninsula. 2,400 years later, it's still a peninsula. Biological warfare. The earliest documented incident of the intention to use biological weapons is recorded in Hittite texts from 1500–1200 BCE, in which victims of tularemia were driven into enemy lands, causing an epidemic. The Assyrians poisoned enemy wells with the fungus ergot, though the results are unknown. Scythian archers dipped their arrows and Roman soldiers their swords into excrements and cadavers. Victims were commonly infected by tetanus as a result. In 1346, the bodies of Mongol warriors of the Golden Horde who had died of plague were thrown over the walls of the besieged Crimean city of Kaffa. During WW II, U.S. submarine commanders were generally allowed only 4 war patrols out of fear that they would either become too ambitious or too cautious after too many patrols. However, CMDR Eugene Flucky of the USS Barb begged for and was granted a 5th war patrol. He then immediately asked that rocket launchers be fitted to the Barb. Already famous for his tactic of maximum harassment, Flucky became the first submarine commander to fire rockets at shore targets, but he didn't stop there. He noticed a supply train on one of the shores he was observing. Unable to use his rockets on it, Flucky sent 8 of his sailors ashore to rig a bomb under the tracks. As the landing party returned to the Barb, the train set off the bomb and was launched 200 feet into the air. This was the only time Allied forces landed on the Japanese home islands during WW II, and the only known time a submarine has sunk a train. Flucky was a wild man, though. On his way back to port without any torpedoes left, he was one sunken ship away from winning a bet, so he rammed the Barb right into it. In the War of 1812, the British Canadians were trying to take Detroit but were severely outnumbered. They only had a couple of hundred British soldiers, and a few hundred militia and native warriors. They couldn't wait because another American force was on the way, so as they set up camp across the river, they dug trenches, and would march by in full view of the Americans, then duck into the trench and sneak back to march by again. At night, they would light extra fires, and at dinner time they would do the same trench trick, with the same guys repeatedly lining up to pretend to get food. They also gave extra British uniforms to the Canadian militiamen so it looked like there were thousands of British soldiers. The Americans had men but not the supplies or morale to endure a siege against an apparently superior British force. So they surrendered the fort without a fight. Back in 1800, Thomas Cochrane, if you've ever heard of Master and Commander, Jack Aubrey is heavily based on this guy, and his life got his first command. A little sloop called the Speedy, with 14 guns, 4-pounders, and a crew of about 80 men. He mostly did convoy duty but got a few cruises, where he was instructed to harass the enemy for a month at a time. Cochrane was really good at this and had sent off almost half his crew in prizes captured ships, and pissed off the Spanish so much they sent a frigate after him called the El Gamo, with 32 guns ranging from 8 to 32 pounders I believe, and about 320 men. So one fine morning, the El Gamo catches up to the Speedy, which Cochrane had disguised as a Danish vessel, even finding someone who spoke Danish to pretend to be the captain, and managed to get away. A little while later, the El Gamo finds them again but doesn't fall for the same trick. The 32-gun frigate with a broadside weight, total weight of cannonballs if the ship fired a salvo, of close to 200 pounds and 6 times as many men was fighting the little sloop with a broadside weight so little that Cochrane claimed he could walk with it in his pocket 28 pounds. Cochrane knew he was done for, so he closed with the El Gamo, pointed his guns up as high as he could, loaded them with 3 cannonballs each, and fired. This first salvo killed the captain of the El Gamo. The El Gamo fired their entire broadside, and missed. The Speedy was so small that the cannonballs of the El Gamo shot over the top and only damaged the sails. No matter how hard they tried, the El Gamo could not get their guns pointing down. So they tried boarding, except the Speedy had pulled away. Each time the El Gamo tried to shoot at them, the Speedy came in close again, and then separated when they tried to board. This went on until the Speedy couldn't sail anymore. So Cochrane brought the 2 ships together and boarded the El Gamo. 53 men stormed into the El Gamo, the doctor stayed behind and managed to capture the quarterdeck and pull down the flag, causing the remaining crew of the El Gamo to think they had surrendered. The final tally: Speedy, 3 dead, 9 wounded. El Gamo, 14 dead, 41 wounded, and 300 captured. This was only one of his insane actions and was possibly one of the best frigate captains of the Age of Sail. I can't believe no one has mentioned this yet, but Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British Navy was having a hell of a time getting into an engagement with the French Navy. Then one day, the French finally committed to a battle after sailing out of a Spanish port, with the Spanish Navy at their sides. The total battle line was 27 British ships against 33 ships of the combined French and Spanish navies. The Allied fleet formed a huge defensive line and invited Nelson to try to attack it. "Come at me, bro." Now, when talking about naval engagements, you'll often hear the term, crossing the T. It was general tactical knowledge at the time that your best bet for winning a naval engagement was to cross the other party's T, basically allowing your own ships to give a maximum broadside to the front ships of your enemy's line formation. Attacking as a line into the teeth of a bunch of broadsides was considered suicidal. But good old Nelson was convinced of the superiority of the British Navy over every other navy in the world, and he was honor-bound to prove that. So what did Nelson do? He yelled YOLO and, after dividing his command into 2 line formations, charged his ships straight at the Allied defense, thus crossing his own T, with his own ship, the HMS Victory, leading one of his 2 lines. His ship and the other lead British ship took terrible hits, but they reached and broke through the French and Spanish line. But get this, when his 2 lines broke through, they kept right on sailing, which cut the French and Spanish Navy into 3 parts, in between his own 2 lines. Suddenly, the French and Spanish navies were having their own T's crossed, with British ships firing all guns and giving full broadsides in both directions as they sailed right on through to the other side. As the smoke finally started to settle, 22 ships of the Spanish and French navies were destroyed. Not a single British ship was lost that day. Nelson, who died later that day from a bullet wound, and the British Navy sailed into history that day as eternal badasses. Siege of Kruja, Albania, 1450. One night during the siege, Skanderbeg sent out a herd of goats with a candle on each of the goats' horns. The encamped Turks believed it to be an Albanian attack and made a movement against the herd. When the Turks advanced far enough, Skanderbeg launched an attack against the force, destroying it. After the siege was lifted, Skanderbeg commemorated his victory by designing a helmet with the head of a goat on it, as a reference to his ingenious tactics used that night. The entire story of Skanderbeg is astonishing. Every step. What we think of as war is really about logistics and projecting power. Getting people and goods to where they need to be is the most important aspect of a war. Everything else is just a series of inconsequential battles if you cannot project power and sustain momentum. To that end, getting food to the troops is paramount. An army marches on its stomach. To that end, one of the craziest tactics was done by Catherine the Great of Russia against the Ottomans. To feed the army, Catherine would issue bills of exchange to Ottoman peasants to pay for grain, the assignat. This was a future promise to pay the bills. The Ottomans had a fixed price for grain, which was the price ceiling that nobody was allowed to sell above. This was paid in gold, which would have been too heavy to carry around and likely would have been stolen by Russian generals. When her army invaded, it was fed by paying above market rates to the Ottomans for their own grain using these assignats. This also deprived the Ottoman troops of bread, and thousands of troops deserted or revolted. What backed these assignats if they were not backed by gold? They were backed by the promise of conquered land, that the Ottoman peasants were working for the Sultan. Catherine bought Ottoman bread by paying above market rates, backed by the land she intended to conquer. To put it in context, you show up with a gun to rob a bank and bribe the security guard with the money you were intending to steal. In North Africa, the British placed fake maps in a jeep. It was driven by an English officer who had been leaking secrets to his belly-dancing Egyptian lover, who passed them on to the Egyptian Brotherhood, who in turn passed them on to the Nazis. The British discovered his activities and decided to kill two birds with one stone. They put the maps in the glove compartment and instructed him to drive in a certain direction. A bomb planted in the jeep by the British killed him and drew the Germans' attention. They found the maps, which indicated smooth driving at a certain narrow pass, which was actually sandy. The German tanks got stuck and were decimated by the British artillery hidden nearby. The book, Bodyguard of Lies, is one of the most fascinating war books I've ever read. The British in WW2 were amazing at deception. A Persian general was stuck besieging a city with impenetrable walls. So, unbeknownst to him, one of his high commanders cut off his own nose and one of his ears. He then went before the general, who was a bit disturbed, asking why his commander would do this. The commander said that it was part of his plan and he knew that the general wouldn't be on board with it if he asked first. The commander then informed the general that he would go before the king of the enemy city, claiming that the general did this to him and that he wanted to betray the said general for this mutilation. The commander then told the general to send his weakest men to a specific place so that the commander, leading the enemy forces, could win a major victory, solidifying his place with the enemy city. The commander would then take over watch of one of the gates and simply let in the general's army. Save for a few hiccups, it worked, and the city was destroyed. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on the best Reddit stories.